to discuss with you guys today is an issue that's kind of been put on the back burner. Most people know that around 2007, 2008, we had a foreclosure meltdown in America. What most people don't know is a lot of the things that the banks and financial industries did in 2007 and 2008, they're still doing today. Nothing has changed. And nobody's hurt worse by this than we are as African Americans. Just to give you a little point of reference, in 2013, there was a report by the Pew Research Center, and this is really important for us to know, because this is the kind of stuff that they don't necessarily put out in mainstream media. They showed that the median net worth of black households decreased by an astounding 53% in 2005 to 2009. You think about what that means. Over half of our net worth disappeared. Because for most of us that are African Americans and are not wealthy, most of our net worth comes from being homeowners. Our equity in our homes, that's what we use to do a lot of things, to buy cars, to put our kids through school, because college is extremely nutcase in terms of price. So if you want your kids to go to school, you usually take out a second mortgage and make that happen. So what ended up happening is in 2007, 2008, we became the mecca of foreclosures. Everybody doesn't know that, but the foreclosure insanity started here in Cleveland. 60 Minutes did a story on it way back then, and what was interesting was, if you ever want to get like the real gist of how this thing happened and how we got to where we are, there's a book called Chain of Title. It was written by a guy named David Dayen, and it really expresses exactly how we went from there to here. And a lot of people think that all of this is over with because they don't talk about it anymore, but they're still stealing our houses. And it's happening right here in Cuyahoga County. And you don't necessarily have to be behind on your mortgage. They've actually taken people's houses that weren't even behind. And part of the reason that this was allowed to happen is back in the 1990s, they started a process that morphed right through the 2000s, and it's still happening today. Has anybody ever heard of an organization called MERS? Wow. MERS, M-E-R-S. Now, I'm not talking about the medical issue either. I'm talking about the Mortgage Electronic Registration System. Nobody's heard of that? Okay. Wow. In the 1990s, the big banks got together and they said, how can we steal more money from America? And they figured out how to do it. They came up with this organization called MERS. What it is a mortgage repository. And what they basically did was they said, this is what we're going to do. We're going to take regular mortgages and we're going to turn them into this thing called mortgage-backed securities. And what that is they pool a bunch of mortgages together, they put them in a trust, and they sell this stuff on Wall Street. Okay? Now, this is where it gets really funky. They took these mortgages and they went to these rating agencies. Have you ever heard of Standard & Poor's?
Yeah.
Moody's?
Yeah.
Fitch? They went to these people and they got these people to say, we want you to take these mortgages that are basically crap mortgages. We want you to rate them AAA. So we can put them on Wall Street and sell them to investors. And they did it. They put these junk bonds in mortgages and sold them on Wall Street. Then they did something else curious. They said, we're going to make even more money. How can we make sure we get paid if people default? We got to have some kind of insurance mechanism, right? But we can't, no. We can't go through the insurance industry because we'll be regulated. So we're going to come up with something we call credit default swaps. And what that really is insurance on mortgages without going through the insurance agency so we don't have to be regulated. And what it did was take those, and AIG is the one that did the insurance, made a killing on this stuff. They came out with even another component of it. They said, this is what we're going to do. We're going to take one mortgage, we're going to cut it up into 30 different pieces, we're going to put it into 30 different mortgage-backed securities into a package they call a REMIC, which is a real estate mortgage investment conduit. You don't really need to know what that really is other than it's a package that they put mortgages into. What the credit default swap did was it said we're going to insure every one of that 1/30th for the cost of that house. So if you got a house for $300,000, if you defaulted, they got $9 million. So what was their motivation to make sure you stayed in that house? There was none. And people wondered, why does this keep happening? I'm sending in for this modification and they lose my paperwork 9 times. You remember hearing about that? Where people kept sending this stuff in and they would lose it and lose. That was all purposefully done. Because they did the unthinkable. They're making $9 million off a $300,000 mortgage and they're going to take your house. So they're getting it all. And people wondered why this was happening. Well, it was happening because the banks got together and created MERS. And here's the 2 things MERS did that was detrimental to us that helped them tremendously. The one thing MERS did was it allowed the mortgage industry to trade these mortgages among themselves and not put it on the county recorder's books. A process that had been happening for over 300 years. You used to be able to go down to the county recorder's office, go in the back, they'd put out this gigantic book that looked like 3 times War and Peace. You slam this thing down on the table and you turn it, and in about 2 minutes you could find your mortgage. You could find your property, and you knew from that book who owned your property from the day it was built until the day you opened that book. And the bank said, we don't want to do that anymore. We don't want them to know. So they took that out of our hands by putting it in MERS, and the government allowed it to happen. Think about what kind of game that was played. You got a question now?
Yeah, I do, because, and I hate to interrupt you, but, and I don't know if this is related. It might not be related, but both of my parents have been in real estate for a combined 40 years, so I have some experience in it. And typically you can search for land on the recorder, the county recorder,
Exactly.
right?
In the book.
Well, recently, I've been working with Little Africa, which is we're trying to open a black-owned food co-op, and looking for
Superior?
property. No,
Oh,
no,
okay.
no, this is a new group.
Okay.
Some of the addresses don't appear. And this is, I don't know if this is related to what you're saying, that they took the transactions of property offline and they're doing something that's not visible to the public anymore, like you can go in and see it, but it just becomes a mystery. It's like, okay, you put the address in, nothing is showing up for a lot of the properties that are vacant or, whatever have you. And I don't know if that's part of it, because the county is government, it's not banking, but it seems to me like maybe they're in cahoots on some things, because the properties that you may look for to see the availability and see the record. And at first I thought it was a fluke because one didn't show up, but then it had occurred. Yeah, I'm like, something's not right.
Okay, well, in some ways the county is in league, but in most cases it's because the bankers did not have to log that information. You understand what I'm saying? That once they went to MERS, they didn't have to do the recorder anymore. So I was getting ready to say the second part of what MERS got off was they stole and continue to steal hundreds of millions of dollars from the county recorder's offices all over the country, because they don't have to pay those fees every time it's recorded anymore. They're behind the curtain like the Wizard of Oz, and they're exchanging mortgages amongst themselves. And you don't know who owns it. You're trying to figure it out, but the county recorder doesn't have that information anymore because they're not required to log it. This is how we got to where we are, and we're still here. We just don't realize we're still here. Just because they're not talking about it anymore, that's the way the status quo wants it. What we don't put out there, you don't know.
For those who might want a better visual, if I remember correctly, there was a movie recently out called The Big Short. And it gave some very good information about how that stuff works.
It did. But the David Dayen book is
Right,
even better.
I know. I'm just saying though, but to get just some insight, check that movie out. It came out maybe last year, but it gave some real interesting kind of insight.
Yeah, The Big Short was a good one. There's a couple of them. Matt Damon narrated one that was really good.
Yeah.
But the problem is, as it is for most of us African Americans, is we suffer from a lack of knowledge. We don't know what they're doing. And Marvin and I have done this probably 6 times already in different forums and workshops, and we get a lot of the same looks. People look, that can't be going on. Yes, it is. I'm telling you, we've been researching, we know what they're doing. But the thing is that because not enough of us know, we don't put enough pressure on this, and the thing that happened with MERS happened behind closed doors, wasn't anything they reported on. The big banks set this up, and like I said, the government let it happen. And so now we're in a position where we've got a lot of what they call ghost titles, clouded titles, because these properties, they don't know who owned them. And another thing they did was when they created the mortgage-backed securities, when they took conventional mortgages and put them in mortgage-backed securities, they destroyed all the records. They destroyed the original notes, the original mortgage. People said, why would they do that? Because they didn't want to be audited. You destroy the evidence, who's going to say anything? The investors don't find out until they crack them open. After the bubble burst, they've already lost millions. The banks cleaned up. They stole from us and them.
And we bailed them out with some trees.
And we bailed them out. Oh, Hank Paulson. Hank Paulson walked into Congress in agreement with him and George Bush. He handed the Congress 3 sheets of paper and asked for $777 billion, and they gave it to him because they needed to cover this up. But I'm going to hand the torch to Marva and let her give you some of the local stuff. I could talk about this stuff all day long, but I wanted to give you guys something because this particular piece we all need to know. What they did and how they got away with it.
Before Sister Marva starts, I just wanted to kind of baseline with the folks in the room to see if any of the terminology
Yeah, if
that
any,
has
you need
been
anything
used,
explained.
you need some clarification, because if you're not deep in the real estate and all that, a lot of this could be.
Yeah, mortgage-backed securities. I tried this. Does anybody not understand what I was trying to convey with that? Okay, what mortgage-backed securities are, they're mortgages that they changed from conventional mortgages into these securities that they could sell on Wall Street. Now, I know that sounds kind of confused to the average person, like, well, why would they even do that? Well, it's a bait and switch kind of thing. Because if we go back to the beginning of what I discussed, if mortgages had stayed the way they were, you could have gone to your recorder's office and you could have seen the whole history. They wanted to stop that from happening. The way they did that was to put it into securities. And once they put it into a mortgage-backed security, they destroyed all the original information. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Okay. Once they destroyed the information, they knew at any time those mortgage-backed securities, or REMICs, the vehicle in which the securities were put, when it was eventually cracked open, it would be many, many years down the road. They would have made their money and gone. The investors are sitting there holding the bag. And then they come into court, not representing the trust, but representing one of these banks that didn't even own your property, but who can prove it because the original notes were destroyed. Then they would get with the judges and say, hey, we need these mortgages pushed through. We need these foreclosures done so we can get in and out. And what happened? The judges let it go through, and why do you think that was? Because they had stock in the mortgage-backed security. So the judges were letting it go through. So this is the kind of insanity that we're dealing with, and we've been fighting this beast for a while, but this is one of those kind of things where it's like Mount Rushmore and you got a chisel, okay? That's what you're dealing with, yes.
Is there any way a person can get out of the contract with these criminals? Because it's illegal anyway for them to own their house or whatever. It's not their property, it's not their land. They took all of that from our, us from over here, but do you know how to get out of a contract if you already are in a contract with them?
Well, see, here's the problem. There is no contract anymore. That's what I'm trying to explain to you.
Okay.
The original paperwork was destroyed. Whoever you signed with originally was not the ones who eventually had it. But you don't know even what trust it's in, because all of this information is being kept from the public. That's why I'm saying they're behind the curtain exchanging mortgages and notes like this.
Right.
You're not even seeing who's getting it.
Wouldn't the
So when you're
abstract have that on it?
Not necessarily.
Got an abstract for all
Not
your
necessarily.
properties?
Because if the originals are destroyed, then how do you track?
I'm talking about the original abstract that tracks everyone who's on the property and the people who owned it and the person.
They'll
who
have
owned it.
names, they'll have individuals, they'll have the names of everybody who at one point owned that particular property.
If you had the abstract, it's only going to tell you who had it originally, not who had it last. You understand what I'm saying?
But I
Whoever it
do understand what
transferred to.
you're saying.
Yeah.
Okay.
Well,
Whoever it
we'll-
transferred to, because the original people that owned it are not gonna be the people you're talking to if it was put into a trust. That's what I'm saying. If you signed, let's just say you bought a mortgage 10 years ago.
Now slow down, 'cause
Okay, you got an original, you got your original paperwork is right here in your hand. Here are what they call the blue ink documents. Okay, I've got these in my hand. But somewhere down the line, as we all know, they sell mortgages and they sell notes. And within a 10-year, 15-year period, you could almost expect to have your note and mortgage sold at least 3 times. So can you find the last person that had it? Probably not, because they're exchanging these mortgages behind a curtain. You don't see how that's going on. And if they're not putting that information into the county record, there's no way to track it.
Well, you will get notified if you fall behind.
Oh,
yeah,
no
that's
doubt,
when you'll know
no
who
doubt.
owns it.
Well, it's always, you gonna pay us, we don't have to pay you.
Somebody
You know how that
You
goes.
like, I didn't even buy my.
And
you
she's-
got my mortgage
did he
from
answer
you.
your question?
She looks like she's still not quite
Because
clear.
I wanted her to actually help my mother, because I know it's all fraudulent.
Mm-hmm.
But, so, for instance, it was one bank that,
Is she in foreclosure now?
no, but
Okay.
it was one bank that supposedly owned it or whatever.
Mhm.
And then it would be 3, 4, 5 months later, it's another person coming on.
Mm-hmm.
So is that kind of part of that whole selling?
It is part of it, but
mortgage?
there are so many components to it. You have how many times it's bought and sold before you get to the foreclosure process. And then we've even been involved in cases where they sold it while it was in the foreclosure process. It was already in court, and they sold it.
They do that with.
They do that too.
loans too,
Yeah.
Yeah,
right?
they do, but this
Yeah.
mortgage thing is so much bigger. Not saying that isn't a big issue, because it is, but mortgages are so much bigger because they displace us. And see, this is all part of this gentrification process. People think that this is just something they come up to be greedy. It's much, much bigger than that. And it's designed to, I think we talked about yesterday, move us away from waterway areas, park areas, other, really focal points. In any city across America, you name it, that's what they're doing. But this is systematic. There is nothing haphazard about what's going on here. This is a design.
When you look at the stats, because having said that,
Mhm.
what's the black stat? You know what I mean? Because it seemed to me like the
I'm
banks.
gonna hand the ball to Marvin and let her go with that one.
Well, if you, first off, when Dave and I usually start our forums, we ask people, do you know what a foreclosure is? It is when someone has defaulted on their mortgage. Everybody's aware of that, correct? That means that somebody didn't pay the so-called owner of that particular note. And if you know what a note is, you know that's something that
Or
you
the
signed on,
servicer.
an agreement that you've made with your lender to pay them X amount of money monthly for property. Now, in saying that, what has been skewed against us as a people, once you have purchased that particular property, you may have a high interest rate. They steered minorities and Hispanics towards high interest rate loans, meaning you will be paying most likely 65 to, we've seen, wow, even higher than that more of a percentage.
Let me just interject this real quick, and I'm gonna hand it right back to you. To give you a visual of what that means, $100,000 loan at 3% is probably gonna cost you about $420 a month. Okay, and that's what the white people get. Those are the rates that they get. They were steered towards the prime rates. We were given all the subprime stuff. And this has been documented throughout the country that this is what happens. Now, in our case, when we bought our house, we got the subprime rate, being black, at 11.99. You know what the difference is between 3 and 11.99 in terms of a payment? $421 versus $1,027. That's how they're getting us out of our property. That's how they do it. They set us up to fail, because they know if you're paying $1,000 mortgage and you ain't making but $2,000 a month or $3,000 a month, if you're making $3,000, that's great. But eventually something's going to happen to chip away at that, and all you got to miss is one. And in some cases, people didn't miss any, and they took their property by way of quiet title. Yes, ma'am. Go ahead, Mark.
So what we try to do is try and make it a little more understandable, because we've run into situations where people, they don't want to talk about a foreclosure. You can even be in it. We've been in rooms with individuals, and they're currently in foreclosure, but just they're too embarrassed to talk about it, You know, they feel as if you might think less of them because they're in a foreclosure, but that's really not the case. You do have your standard foreclosures where someone really did miss a mortgage payment, but there are guidelines that specifically the federal government set up in order to allow you to be able to reduce that interest rate down to something you can handle. So what we have discovered is that the banks are not doing that for minorities, primarily minorities and Latinos. And we're saying at this point, it's time for us to know what's going on because we're being gentrified. You know, we're losing our properties when the help was out there to make sure you stayed in those properties. But a foreclosure can be very difficult to understand. Now, most people, when you are in a foreclosure, you can't pay that mortgage. You would realize the next 30 days, you might say, well, I'm going to miss it. I know that. But there is provisions to help you through that process. That's one area that we can also explain. We'll do it a little bit in depth, but that takes a little longer. But again, to answer about the local numbers, oh, that's amazing. We've had over 150,000 foreclosures just in Cuyahoga County. Think about that. We've lost so much population here. And if you notice within, let's say, 105, Upper Euclid, you know, University Heights, you see all these brand new apartment buildings coming up. This is why. This is a part of it. They moved us out. Then you look over to the other corridor and you realize that's a new development that's happening because they took our properties through eminent domain. That's another part of gentrification. And, you know, there were multiple families living in these properties generationally. They did not want to move. We said in a meeting. And I was quite stunned in one of these particular meetings to hear Sandra Williams make a not a good statement to the individuals there that you're in the way.
This
But
is one of our state senators.
how can you be in the way?
Black state senator.
How are you in the way? And the entire room was quite upset about that one particular statement, as well as I was. But we're not in the way. Now, if you choose to move us out, then give us prime rates for those properties. The individuals that were in that room were complaining. They weren't purchasing their properties for the prime rates that were out there. Basically nominal fees, nominal monies that they were getting these properties.
And they were the lucky ones.
Yeah, they were. And moving a lot of our elderlies into apartment complex for seniors. You know, a lot of these individuals live from childhood, you know, in these properties. That's all they knew was a house.
3 and 4 generations
A
of
home.
the family.
Right. So, you know, these are the mechanisms when you look at gentrification. And we do have a way to battle this. That's why Dave and I do what we do. And that is to try our best to teach you to stay in your properties and what to do if ever you're faced with the foreclosure. But yeah, the numbers are quite high. And if you were to take a look at the handout, now there's a reason we left the front page to let you know about our group that we've developed and the members of that group. So you have and there's contact information, so you're able to send us emails and phone
And if
calls.
anybody wants to, we will give you guys our personal contact information so that you can call us if you need to. Because I don't know if anybody in this room is going through a foreclosure or knows somebody that is, but what we do know, like Marva mentioned earlier, this is something people just don't want to talk about. They're embarrassed, and we tell people everywhere we go, if you don't want to talk about it in an open forum, that's fine, but see us afterwards if you think we can help you, then we'd like to do that. Because this is the type thing that, you know, to me, next to police brutality, which is one of the things we fought tooth and nail on in the last couple of years, this is the next most important thing. Because this is devastating in the sense that it displaces families. You got elderly people that get put out on the street. You got children that get displaced from their schools and friends. And that works a tremendous hardship on children, and that's something that's even rarely discussed. But the whole idea is the black community, other than police and inner city violence, this is the next level of violence. This is the next tier. And this is that silent violence they don't talk about. This is the stuff that crushes families for generations. And you don't know it because they don't want to talk about it because they're embarrassed, and that's why it festers. So that's why we say when we talk in a crowd, and if there's somebody that's embarrassed about it, don't be. But if you don't want to talk about it publicly, we get it. But don't let us get out of here without you touching base with us if we can help you.
And the second,
I have a question about your stat. You said Cuyahoga County had over 150,000 foreclosures. What period of time?
they're looking at between, this was 2006, and we are conservatively saying between 2006 and 2010.
4 years?
Yes.
Yeah.
It's considerably more than that
So
now.
from 2010.
We're probably well
to
over 200,000 now.
2017, yeah.
Well over 200,000.
And the reason why, because there is actually a report that was done by Western Reserve Conservative.
What's the name of that?
Yeah, I'll pass it around. You can take a look.
And this is probably one of 30 journals that you.
Yeah, and
Got our hands on it.
it's a lot of reading, and
Yeah, it
also
is.
too, our county council, there's also a report from them. So I thought I had it, that's what I was looking for. You know, this is deep rooted, and until we can cut this cancer out and really, make sure we have this platform to do so. We have a high position in order to do this, to protect our properties. But again, as I, spoke about primarily, I'm sorry, go ahead.
I was gonna wait till you're done. My question is, like, for someone like me, like, in the future, when I buy a house, like, what is the tips for that when dealing with?
Title, you
Make sure you don't have a clouded title on it for
check
one.
that title.
And that's huge, and that's not, it's not always the easiest thing to find out. But you gotta kind of do your. Clouded title means that who owns it? Does anybody know who owns it? And this was created by the banks, the judiciary, and our government. This was a three-tiered, and this didn't happen in a vacuum, so to speak. I mean, they decided that they wanted to control the real estate market in a way that it had never been controlled before. And so they devised this plan. The banks devised a plan to have MERS. Once they got the MERS machine running and the foreclosures, the judiciary decided we're not going to stand in the way of these foreclosures because we have stock in these mortgage-backed securities on Wall Street. The federal government didn't want to stand in the way of the foreclosures because they couldn't, they labeled the banks too big to fail. And I remember having a conversation with somebody in Congresswoman Marsha Fudge's office, and I told him, I said, are you saying the banks are too big to fail, which means we're too small to succeed? Crickets, total crickets.
Yeah.
Because that's in essence what they're saying. We don't mean anything. Once we've milked you for all we could get you for, as a matter of fact, this was one of the most terrible things about the whole mortgage thing. They ran people through this modification system where people had trial modifications. Do you remember that part? They would take people's payments for a year and a half, 2 years, and at the end of that they'd say, you don't qualify for dropping, foreclosing anyway. They were gonna do it anyway. But they had to milk them for all the money they could get until they got to the end. They already knew what they were gonna do because, as I said before, a credit default swap was an insurance plan that made sure they got $9 million off a $300,000 mortgage, so they had no impetus whatsoever to sit down with you and try to, lower your mortgage. That didn't even make sense. We're making too much money here. And then what they've done in some cases, which we're really working hard on, is they would tear the freaking property down rather than give it back to you.
So you have nothing to go back
Because,
to.
as they said, bulldozed homes tell no tales. So they could rebuild and do it all over again. Not to mention, if they really didn't want to tear it down, they would just push it through our land banks.
It's a bamboozle anyway.
Right.
It is.
Say you have a $50,000 mortgage and you take it out for 30 years. You might be in year 5 and your principal is still $45,000. Whereas if you had just took out a simple interest loan of $50,000, you know what I mean, for 15 years, you'd already have paid a third of that balance off. So even when you look at what they call amortization schedules, meaning you pay heavy interest up front. So if your house note is $500, like $400 of it is going to the interest.
Absolutely.
$50 is going to the principal, then you have taxes and insurance. So you end up paying $150,000 for a house, a $50,000 house. So to me, mortgage is not even, I won't even encourage anybody to do mortgage. I mean, if there's another way to acquire land or property, I would say look at other routes, because the mortgage is an illusion, and you end up, it's just not cost effective in the long run. And so before you even get into it, I would look at auction. You can utilize a nonprofit to get land gifted to you if you have a use that you can say for the land, like for a center, or a school, or a community garden. And so I would really start, we gotta think outside of the system in terms of land acquisition.
And another thing I would suggest, I don't want to cut you off, and another thing I would suggest is, you know, you're a fitness buff, so you probably got the energy to do it. Find you a fixer-upper, pay cash for it. You know what I'm saying? That's actually one of the better ways to go if you can do it. I mean, and that's one of those things, it's almost like the working out piece, you're putting in the work, okay? You have to put in the work to do this too, because this whole thing is designed to steal from us. There's no doubt about it. And it's to steal more from us than it is from the Caucasian community. So we know what we're dealing with. What we have to find out is what mechanisms can we utilize to make sure that this doesn't impact us as negatively as it has. And we're working towards that. Marv and I are, we just got through, we're not done yet, but we were working with a young lady in our neighborhood who was being foreclosed on, and we helped write her briefs in trial court, the appellate court, and Marva actually put together the brief for the Supreme Court. I put the polish and stuff to it, and they accepted the filing. They almost never accept a Supreme Court filing in this state from black folk, almost never.
Pro se now.
Pro se. Pro se. Pro se, yeah. So, and that's God's grace. You know, we don't take a lot of, I mean, we sit down at the computer and we say, okay, Lord, what do we need to do to make this happen? And sometimes he'll just guide you through it. Sometimes it's an easy walk, and sometimes it's like walking on glass, but you work through it and you get it done. And so now she's waiting to hear from the Ohio Supreme Court as to when she needs to file that brief, and then we're going to work with her on that as well. So this is hard work. This ain't for the faint of heart. But none of this is. None of what we're talking about is going to be easy, because a lot of it has occurred, unfortunately, because of our apathy. We sat back and let a lot of this stuff occur. We didn't have the spirit of the 60s. I grew up in the 60s. I saw what those people did. And that was some incredible stuff when you watched and saw what people did who weren't in the limelight. I'm talking about the people who were in the background making it happen. And so we have to recapture that, the spirit of what it takes to make this thing happen in this age, because now they're on us even more than they were then. And we have to understand that we're not islands. None of us are. And as long as we keep saying we're going to use these divisive things to keep us apart rather than looking at what actually bands us together, we're going to lose.
And what
So we got to stay focused and stay together.
and what we like to do, we don't necessarily, we're not speaking at people, because that's not how you learn, because this is a classroom.
Okay, let me grab these two questions.
Yeah. You can look it up. Mortgage is Latin for death note.
Mort.
Mortician.
Like the mort,
Yeah.
death.
Yeah, more. Exactly. That's French for
So
death. Yeah.
just going off what Angela was saying about how you shouldn't even.
Right.
Get
Yeah.
into
Then
that
you pay the
ridiculous-
money to a landlord. He's the lord of the land. Like he pretty much owns it.
Right.
See, that's why what we did, what our elders did, they passed down those properties. So there was never a mortgage that you would have to pay. But today, the young people, for some reason, they don't get it. They don't get the
importance.
importance of holding on to these properties. And that's something I think over time we really need to instill in our kids to learn the importance of being a property owner or you know, having stake in land, because you are a stakeholder. Every single one of us, our children, are stakeholders. And
the other thing I noticed too is that even when property is handed down today, the young people don't take care of it.
yeah,
We were kind of conditioned to do that. I'm gonna get his question and then yours, okay? We were kind of conditioned to do that back in the day when the property was given to us. We knew what it took to get there, what our parents had to go through to get there. So if something was handed down to us and we knew that you lose this, you're gonna basically lose your heritage.
yeah.
So we kind of understood it. Kids don't really understand that as well now, and so it's important that we reinstill so that they understand that property is gold. You know, I don't care what happens in the real estate market, eventually that property is going to go up again. That's just the nature of the beast. It's always happened and it always will. You got a question, Drew?
Yeah, I did, but actually, you guys already answered it.
Okay.
I was gonna ask the question, well, what's the alternative to mortgages?
Yeah, that's one of the, and Angela, what's going to be important as we move through all of these processes is to merge what we know with what you know and come together with more workshops to inform people. This is how you can move ahead in this area. You don't have to hook into a mortgage. You can do this, do that, take out a loan, as you say, or buy a fixer-upper, because that's, to me, that's really the only way to go. Buy you a fixer-upper for about $5,000 or $7,000 and go in and put in the work. You know, because having worked for CMHA, I got probably 30 buddies that know how to do this, that, and the other.
Nice.
You know, and so if I had to go that route, that's the route that I would go. But it's really important, and if we don't know those type people, that's where the networking piece come in. Find out who knows them. We got to form our own Angie's lists.
That's right.
You know what I'm saying?
Yes, that's right.
Exactly.
The
That's
black
right.
Angie's list.
That's right.
Of the handout. And it is just two or 3 pages. Let me see. I put in there. I can only put 2. Okay, yeah, I only put 2 pages because one thing that we have a tendency to run into is people say, well, we're not gonna read all of that. But you have to read it. So we try to make sure it's in a shorter form so people can kind of grasp what's going on. So what we did, we just put 2 pages of this filing, and this is a part of a amicus brief, and it basically is telling you who the respondents are and who the petitioners are, meaning the people who brought the lawsuit and those who the lawsuit is about. Now, in this particular, this is Bank of America Corporation, which all of the major banks are really part of this. This is just theirs because it references the case that we just filed in the Supreme Court. And in this, you can see it, it's already been written, that in the Supreme Court of the United States, and they have determined, and if you turn to the second page, that, and if you look at 2A, you will see that banks' policies led directly to discriminatory assignments of minority borrowers to high-priced, high-risk mortgages. And it also continues, you can read at your leisure. And in saying that, I don't know what to say, what this is, our government, well, it's not yet our government, because the things that's been done against us should not continue if this was a government that was protecting our rights. But the United States Supreme Court already found the banks guilty of these very discriminatory acts against us. As of, March 1st of 2017, the decision came down, and now it's giving our states, our municipalities, the abilities to assess the foreclosures to see who was discriminated against, and in essence file a lawsuit. What we've seen, Cuyahoga County, I can talk about being here, they don't care. We have brought them case after case after case that proves discrimination. They're just blowing us off. So we're saying now, no more of this.
Right.
150,000, really, that's conservatively. 150,000 foreclosures here should send up an enormous red flag. And when you look at our people being moved out, that's another red flag. All they look at is new construction, big business, and all this coming in. But it's our properties, our houses, our children, our futures. So in saying that as well, because now we already have the investigation, we have also the Department of Justice investigation to say these things occurred. We have the Inspector General saying these things occurred. But guess what we don't have? We don't have the homeowners, a list who can access this and who then can file their lawsuit to retain those properties. So this is why Dave and I are doing this. We're saying now's the time. We have put a lot of legwork into constructing the dynamics based on what has occurred to prove A happened, your particular note, they're fraudulent things, robo-signed documents, not your signatures. Many of you don't even know, because if you are homeowners,
Perjury.
please check your documents. Please look at them. Because what they're doing, they're signing your name onto documents you don't have a clue on. And the next thing that could happen is a foreclosure could happen. Somebody could end up on your property with an eviction notice telling you to move, and you're stuck. We just had that happen to somebody. We got a call, and nothing we can do because she chose to just move for $2,000 taxes that she owed. She didn't realize that she can go down to the auditor's office and get on a payment plan, because they have payment plans that you are able to access. And you can say, well, I can pay $50 a month, okay, towards this. But then you also have to look out, because there's penalties and interest. So that's another story. But there are protective measures out there. So in guiding everybody to understand the government has already done the investigation. It's done to prove exactly what we're saying. It's just finding the documents through what you have so we can line those up with what their findings were, and which we did in this case, and which we've done in a few other cases, and which we've done in ours. Because in our particular case,
I was getting ready to get into that.
which is astonishing, we had 3 attorneys on our case. They forged David's signature on an allonge to note. How many people know what that is? Okay, an allonge to note is that instrument that the banks use. It's a note.
How do you spell it?
ALLONGE. It's an attachment that goes on a note when there is no room at the bottom of the note to have the signature and transfer. But what they do is they negate that when they want to take your house, they'll put a allonge on it, and then what they'll do is they'll transfer the title to your note, or the right to your note, to somebody else by blank endorsement. The courts are doing it all over the state of Ohio. It's actually, let me say this real quick, because I know.
They'll transfer your note without your signature, that's what you said?
Oh,
They'll
sign
transfer
your
a
name.
note without the bank signature.
Yeah. No signature.
It's just a blank endorsement. Basically, what they call it is bearer paper.
Bearer paper.
Yeah.
This is my confusion. The same system that allows you to do this illegal or legal action, depending on who you are, is the same one that you have to fight in. And you said that the government, I don't know which government, what layer of government, you said the government substantiated our findings.
Yeah.
So, I mean, to me, that's like,
Yeah, it's 6 in one hand, half a dozen in the other. It's kind of like, the operation was a success, but the patient died. It's one of those kind of deals where
Thank you.
they're not really holding the banks accountable to what they say they're going to hold them accountable to. Let me say this real quick, just to get this out there. There are 4 major cases, legal cases, in the state of Ohio and Cuyahoga County that are really driving this train for how they're dealing with foreclosures. One is our case, City Mortgage versus Patterson. We actually won at the trial court. The appellate court came back and changed case law precedent in the appellate version to take the house away. The original precedent for foreclosures or how they proceed was Wells Fargo versus Jordan. And in that case, this same Ohio 8th District Court of Appeals said you had to have both the note and the mortgage to foreclose. Then they changed it in our case. When we went from the trial court to the appellate court, city mortgages attorneys came in and said, wait a minute, before you rule on this, wait for the Ohio Supreme Court to rule on the Schwartzwald case. So they waited. The Schwartzwald case comes down, and there's a passage in there that said Federal Home Loan owned neither the note nor the mortgage. So the Ohio 8th District said, since they said they own neither, what they must be saying is if they'd owned either one, they would have had standing. Absolute lie. No basis in reality whatsoever. But they used that to rule against us. Now comes July of 2016. Did you have a question too? Did you have another question?
No,
Okay,
go ahead.
I'm gonna finish this and then. July of 2016, a little over a year ago, this case comes down from the Ohio State Supreme Court, Deutsche Bank versus Holden. And what they said in that was exactly what we said 4 years ago when they ruled against us. The Ohio Supreme Court said, well, there have been people and courts that have ruled that if you had an interest in either the note or the mortgage, then you had standing. That's not what we meant. Well, why didn't you say that 4 years ago? That was my point. You're going to let the Ohio 8th District Court of Appeals send you because our case went from them to the Ohio Supreme Court. The Ohio Supreme Court denied jurisdiction. They wouldn't even hear our case. Okay. But the appellate court sent to you the same thing that says we're ruling on this case and we're ruling against them because we're saying either the note or mortgage has standing. And the Ohio Supreme Court, if this was your thought process in 2012, why didn't you tell them that? But they didn't, because they wanted to keep this machine rolling.
Right.
And see, this is what we're dealing with. Sometimes it's what's said, sometimes it's what's not said. Sometimes it's what's done, and sometimes it's what they fail to do. And in this case, they waited 4 years to say, we never said it was the note or mortgage that had standing. It was always both. Then why didn't you tell them that and they wouldn't have ruled against us and took our house? But these are the games that they're playing in Ohio. And these are the 4 cases that that if you, and I know it's a lot of reading, but City Mortgage versus Patterson, Federal Home Loan versus Schwartzwald, Wells Fargo versus Jordan, and Deutsche Bank versus Holden. Those are the 4 cases that are really driving the train of foreclosure in the state of Ohio.
That's 4 different banks.
That's 4 different cases.
4 different banks though too, right?
Yeah, actually it is. City Mortgage, Federal Home Loan, Wells Fargo, and Deutsche Bank. It's 4 different banks, but it's the same kind of ideology.
Is it Deutsche Bank you're saying?
Deutsche Bank,
Oh,
yeah.
Deutsche.
Mm-hmm. Go ahead, Mark.
And what, we stress, we really stress is that look at your documents. If you know any homeowners, pull out those notes, the launch to notes, find out what's going on. Because one day that knock can come to your door. They're trying their best to take every single property that we own. And they are very successful at this. And that's because we don't have a mechanism that's in place to protect our interests. That's why we're trying to create it. And we were stunned when we stepped out. We were like, wait a minute, where's the help?
Yeah, where's everybody
Where are
else?
these attorneys?
Attorneys won't touch it.
Not
Because the
one
judges are
attorney.
twisting the attorneys' arm. Because they're basically telling them, well, if you keep pushing this for these homeowners,
Yeah.
don't expect to ever win a case and I'm in my court again.
And going back to the launch.
That's the kind of crap that's
going-
going on.
So how did you all manage to win though? 'Cause, I mean, to me as a layman and a fairly intelligent person,
Yes, you are.
you gotta be dang near gotta be a lawyer to fight for this. Like, people, I mean, that's a tall order for just regular people. You know
Yeah,
what I'm
it is.
saying? To
It
go through cases and to me it was semantics, but obviously it's the application of how they wrote it and their interpretation, et cetera.
And
But
there's a
that's
slight
whole
variance
lot
from
for
judge to judge,
That's a
too.
whole lot for my grandmother or somebody to try to deal with, you know what I'm saying? So,
And that's why,
Well-
go ahead, Mark. You want to?
Well, I just wanted to add on, it's like when I was discussing what the launch to notes are. Now, we went into home ownership believing that, hey, we have a house to raise our children, we're gonna pay this house off, he has a great job. I resigned from nursing to stay home, so, and along the way, something may occur, and many of us realize that we may not be the healthiest person going along. You may be healthy one day and next day something occurs. Well, ours, we hit a hardship because he was injured on the job, and it was a duplex. Our house was a duplex, so we had rental income coming in. So, and we had a savings and good. I mean, our credit was great, all these things. Healthy, strong, and so you never know what's going to set you back. So we made provisions, meaning we had a PMI, as you talked about earlier.
Now, your PMI is your insurance,
Private mortgage insurance.
your insurance to that lender, the lender. The lender is very key to this. That's the person who gives the money to you to pay for this house. That's that money. And then all you're doing is going to a servicer who is now servicing that loan that that lender decided to give to you. Now, your lender and your servicer are two different people. Sometimes it might be the bank also as the lender and the servicer of that note and mortgage, but not often. Now, what has occurred, they have decided, meaning these bankers got together and figured this little plan out to steal your property, meaning they took those allowance to notes, and as your PMI steps in, your PMI, pays off in case there's a default, which in our situation, he was injured. We didn't know if he would return to work or not. It's a major injury. So I called our bank to let them know, I don't know how this thing might play out, but just to let you know, he's injured, but we still had a savings, and we had rental income. So we were able to still continue to meet our obligations from 2002 to 2006 for 4 years. But eventually your money's going to start running out. And in the meantime, we lost a renter. So anyway, so there are guidelines set up for hardship cases. So we're kind of separated from cases where individuals just didn't pay, their mortgage for whatever reason. But in saying that, once you default, automatically that PMI kicks in to pay off that lender. Now what's supposed to happen after that? Anybody knows? Okay, your lender's paid off. Just like you pay off your car. Your car is paid off.
Ideally, the house should be free and clear.
There you go. You get a free and clear title. Wow, guess what happened here in Cuyahoga County was DeMore and Russo. During that time, the bank should have sent down, or your servicer should have sent down to the auditor your free and clear title. Now you have free and clear title to your home, but that did not happen. What they ended up doing was recreating these allonge to notes, signing your name onto things that you had no clue about. Recreating the mortgage assignments, yes. Presenting those to the courts and saying, hey.
Is that illegal?
Yes.
Yeah.
That is illegal.
Yes.
So somebody should go to jail, right?
Yes.
And DeMore and Russo are.
Yes, that's why they're in there. And
That was their whole debacle.
right.
That was a big
That
part
was
of what
part
they were
of it was
involved in.
fraudulent
Big part of it.
foreclosure, and they only targeted, I think, 1 or 2 properties that they were, but,
Politics.
yeah,
Right.
the politics of it. But now you don't know. You are a homeowner with no understanding because you believe your PMI kicked in. You say, wait a minute, but the lender isn't coming after you. Guess who's coming after you? A debt collector. These are servicers, and because we have RESPA, we have.
Yeah, we'd be all day going.
Yeah, we will. So I'm not going to go through
We're
all
not
of
gonna
that.
do
But there are laws that do protect you, like Title 18 USC 1001. Now that is very critical, meaning no false statements on any documents. That is a federal offense. So that's game over. So you just put my name onto something. They signed his name on the note illegally. And we're like, wait a minute. When we discovered this, we're already at the appellate court. Wait a minute. He didn't do this. So now we're learning.
And you have to prove that.
Oh, it's
That was a hard learning curve,
but-
I'll tell you that.
Yeah,
Hard learning
but again, we have all those provisions that protect us against all. Truth in lending is a huge.
So I want to just jump in, and
Yeah.
just 2 things before we wrap up, because we're going to have Sister
Right.
Nakia come, and since we're talking about the system,
Mm-hmm.
it'll be a good next part. I'm just wondering, in terms of solutioning and action, how MWM can work with you all and your organization, or help better fortify the structure that you're trying to build, so that when our people need the type of assistance or research services that you offer, that we can, have those available, for them.
It's
And
still-
just, how do we connect to be able to leverage the expertise you have, because in a lot of cases, I mean, some things are simple, right?
Yeah.
You say, read the documents, which for me, I feel like I gave a finger, a leg, an arm, and all that to get that mortgage. It was so much, I just would start signing.
Yeah.
I mean, it took 3
That's what they
hours
do.
to sign all the pages.
That's
I mean,
what they
I'm gonna
do.
be here for like 3 weeks trying to read all these
Yeah.
documents, and then I probably still need somebody to interpret it. So really,
You need 3 hours to sign. That ain't counting how long it takes to
To
read.
read the stuff,
That's a
right.
whole nother
My
matter.
point.
You'd be
And
there
so-
3 days trying to read all that stuff.
I mean, in a higher context, we want to find out alternative ways to acquire land. But for those that are victim of gentrification and this particular.
And fraudulent foreclosure.
Right,
Mhm.
fraudulent foreclosures, we want to really just formulate what our next steps are in terms of how we can, leverage the knowledge and, the work that you're doing with the platform that we have.
Well, there's gonna be,
Well-
this is like, and to be honest about it, this is an ongoing process. We're still kind of pouring the foundation for this. It would be different if we were already done with all the foundational work and we could just say, hey, this is what we can do to make this happen. Right now, I think the best thing that we can do is just stay in contact with each other. And as situations come up, we have to deal with them on a case-by-case basis. But what I will say is this is kind of important. Anyone dealing with a foreclosure, if they send you paperwork from the court, they send you a summons, do not throw it in a drawer and forget about it. It's not gonna go away. And that's what we tend to do. We get something we don't really understand, especially because foreclosure is something most people are like, I don't even know what that's about. So they throw it because they like, well, I'll deal with that later. And then 28 days goes by a lot faster than you think. And then what ends up happening is if you don't deal with that within 28 days, they're gonna issue a default judgment, and you're gonna lose. You're gonna lose just because you didn't answer. And so our thing is answer. And if you don't know how to answer, pick up a phone and call us. And
Right,
we'll
we
walk
need y'all hotline.
we'll walk you through the process as best we can. But the main thing is answer. You have to answer the summons. And if you don't do any more but say, they don't own my property, make them produce the original documents. If you don't do any more than that and just send that in, that's an answer.
Yeah.
So then they have to come in, and that's what they don't like to do because, believe it or not, and this is kind of, it was even hard for me to believe initially, about 92% of the cases don't even get answered. People don't even answer.
So you
Why? Because they're in default. They're like, it's my
scared.
fault, I didn't pay, forget about it. They don't even answer the summons.
But this here, this
And we
grid,
gotta answer.
right, in this grid sheet real quick. Now, this grid sheet, it lines out all, I probably should have added to that, but I'll get you some copies of this, Angela, so you can give it out to individuals. But the government outlined all of the violations in here that the banks had done against the homeowner, and there is a monetary dollar
But that was
figure,
during the independent foreclosure
right,
review.
attached to it. And what we discovered, 95, 98 maybe % of the people here in Cuyahoga County who were under foreclosure knew nothing about this, did not receive any of these funds, did not receive any help. It did not come across that there was help even to, for them to have. But this
Well,
is
most
a
of
grid
them
sheet.
most of them couldn't afford an attorney.
Yeah, they couldn't, but
To get it, it's
To
like,
get,
is it like
well, no,
unpaid?
you didn't
we
have
were-
to have an attorney to get it, but what I'm saying is you have to have the knowledge to know to get it.
Right,
Is that like unclaimed funds?
no.
No, this
Oh,
is
it's not here.
damages.
It's damn.
This is
Oh,
damages.
I mean, yeah, because I was, it was someone to ask you, is that, do we have a legal grounds that could be a remedy? I mean, you know what I mean, it's part of remedies.
Right. But
Yeah,
replying
but
to that,
it's still
I
open
have
because
another,
people don't know.
what I think, because again, whenever I hear stuff, I'm always, what's the next step?
Mhm.
So, okay, can you let us know, based on, what you're doing and what your projection is, when we can begin to hold hearings here? And do it in such a way, because once we know that, then we can inform United Nations representatives to participate in the hearings. See, that ups the ante. That way, we're not just saying stuff and these people are just like, yeah, blah, 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 blah. When they realize that you have an entity who has specifically come to hear this information, this is very, very important. Now, we created a task force, a gentrification task force. That can be a unit can be in that deals with fraudulent foreclosure. That would be your area. and you would be providing the information, all of what you just said and then some, but allowing those who have experienced this to come in to give their testimony so it can be recorded.
We've actually done that before.
Okay.
But
We
now
got-
we'll be doing it through.
Yeah,
Right,
we'd be doing it
Let's
through
do
you
this
guys, but we
because the
actually did it
United
through the government
Nations
before.
has now an apparatus.
Uh-huh.
And we're not organized in most cities to do this so that it can be applied as it's structured.
Mhm.
So once it's established, then it can be introduced. See, this forces people's hands. This enables you to get documents that might be a little more difficult to get right now. It also helps to bring out other people who, want to do something but don't know where to do it at,
Right.
even from a legal standpoint. Because we now have an international human rights attorney on our team. We didn't we were seeking out stuff, but when he heard, he said, look, I'm with it. And so what we make people do is send us a letter. Because we don't want to hear what you're saying out your mouth.
Right.
We do, but back it up. So everything that I basically say, I can point to it and say there's the letter
Right.
of commitment or the letter of whatever from that entity.
Well,
So my point is, say 2 months, 3 months, whatever it takes, from a projection standpoint, that we will be prepared to do certain hearings here. Some of your selected officials will have to support that. And I don't mean support that in a way of, well, they're going to give you something. No. They have to inform their constituents.
Right.
They have to do that by law. Any kind of hearings or whatever, they have to inform their constituents. That's when it gets to be fun.
And
Wow.
that's interesting because we went before city council. Well, we actually presented to Cleveland and Cummings in a meeting that we had. To
Phyllis Cleveland and
Phyllis
Brian
Cleveland,
Cummings.
right. That was maybe about 8 months ago.
Yeah,
or
6,
something
8
like
months
that.
ago, yeah.
Have heard nothing. Now, we've had meetings with City Council Brancatelli. And he has done absolutely
Nothing.
nothing. And Brancatelli actually was a city councilman from here that had gone to Washington and was in a meeting with Dodd-Frank. Well, yeah.
Yeah,
Right.
actually
And,
prior to Dodd-Frank.
Prior to Dodd-Frank. And in that meeting, this was 2008, they had a meeting in Washington. All of this was discussed, so they knew that these houses were in a situation of being foreclosed on.
Not to mention, we've
So
had
they-
conversations with Sherry Brown.
Yeah.
We've had conversations with Congresswoman Stephanie,
Well, Fudge, she issued a
Marcia
letter,
Fudge's
right,
office?
well, she issued a letter,
She
I just
issued a
want, I'm
letter, but she
sorry,
didn't do
cut
nothing.
Dave off. But she issued a letter to the FBI, we filed with the FBI, so you have to do your administrative
Administrative
remedies.
remedies.
We're done with all our administrative remedies at this point. We have a few other people that now are done with their administrative remedies.
Right.
And we're
So-
at a point now where if we
we-
present to somebody, they better do something.
Right, and Robin, this is
That's
her
what we are.
last step in her administrative remedy. Well, one more is the DOJ, but
Well, no,
everybody can
also the
piggyback.
United States Supreme Court, if that don't work.
Yeah, but see, most people can piggyback onto our filing that we've done already with the Department of Justice, Consumer Financial Protection Bureau. We've done all of everything we
Yeah.
were told to do. So now the next step is,
They need to write y'all a check.
there you go.
Yeah.
What's interesting,
So we can buy
In-
our house back and a few other people.
That's
yeah,
right.
and what's interesting is there is we're blessed about this, there's current case law to not only support us, but the federal government itself to support us.
I have to applaud.
Yes.
But
Solid.
I just-
Tenacity.
Solid.
I mean,
Yes.
because a lot of people
Yes.
don't have the fortitude to
Yes.
keep going. You know what I mean? After a while, they
It's
just
been
like,
11 years.
people burn out, they get
Wow.
tired, and
Wow.
y'all have continued, and I just got to pay respect,
Thank
to
you.
that.
We appreciate
And-
You all
it.
doing that.
Just wanna add one more thing and I'll be done with, well, I had some more things, but that's okay.
Yeah, we don't have enough
We
time.
don't have enough time. But for Robin Brown, what I would really like to happen for her, we're asking for letters of support, to say, basically, that you support her in her measures to, you know, whatever, retrieve her house back to, because it's fraudulent, whatever, we'll probably
Right.
do a format.
Yeah, we can
and
work
send
on
it
the
out.
semantics.
Well, that's when we definitely could, you know,
Because we need to
Sure.
help her in every aspect of this, because we'll stand on your property. We've done rallies on
Yeah, we've done rallies on
properties.
people's property.
And we were so
Yeah.
blessed to have people out on our property twice. Well, we ran the sheriff's away
We ran the
once.
sheriff's away once.
And our attorney was there the second time. He actually served them to let them know they're here illegally. And they didn't even care.
They went through with it anyway, 'cause they had their
But to let
marching
you
orders.
know, that's what we need to do. And we have about?
Well, we
15
scared them so bad with the first time we ran them away. When they came back the second time, they came 6 cars deep.
We have 15, maybe 20, maybe about 15 sheriffs
Good
on our
15
property.
sheriff's deputies,
And-
two to a car, easy.
And they
Three,
remember
some of
that,
them.
because at Robin, when we were on Robin's property with her, you know, they came
Yeah, he
the
knew us
second time.
personally. I didn't even know who
We
he
kind of
was.
ran them off her property the first time. So the second time when they come back, they're like, we don't care, we're gonna do this legal or not, they're gonna do it. So, but again, we're blessed
But
to
you
have
gotta get in
Robin.
their faces. You gotta start somewhere. You
yeah, what
gotta
about the
start
castle
somewhere.
law? Don't come up on my property.
Yeah,
Anyway.
right.
Yeah, it would
But-
be good if that worked.
Right.
But to say this, you know, they're doing this whether you own or don't own.
Thank you, Angela.
Thank you.